Hello, and welcome back to Drowsy History. Get comfortable, pull the blanket up a little higher, let your shoulders sink into the mattress, and let the day you just lived loosen its grip on you, one thought at a time. Wherever you are, in a quiet bedroom, on a night shift break, in a car parked somewhere waiting for sleep to feel possible, you're welcome here. Tonight, we're going somewhere unexpected. We're going back roughly 600 years into the drafty stone corridors of a medieval castle to follow one of the strangest, most misunderstood workers in all of history through a single ordinary day. Not the king, not the knight, not the bishop in his embroidered robes, the fool, the jester, the man in the bells. And here is the promise of tonight's journey, right up front, because you deserve to know where we're going. Almost everything you think you know about court jesters is wrong. The cartwheels, the pie in the face, the empty headed clown capering for a cruel king, that image was mostly invented centuries later. The real jester had one of the most complicated, most protected, and in some ways most powerful jobs in the entire castle, and most of his day, as you're about to see, wasn't spent joking at all. Before we begin, if these quiet journeys into the past help you rest, consider subscribing. It helps this little channel more than you know. And tonight, I have a question for the comments, a different one than usual. What is the oldest story your family still tells? A name that got passed down? A voyage someone survived? A farm? A feud? A rumor no one could ever quite confirm? However small, however far back, leave it below. Stories like those, the ones passed around kitchen tables instead of written into textbooks, are exactly what this channel is about. And if you don't have one, that's all right. Just tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, dim the lights, slow your breathing. The castle is waiting, and somewhere inside it, before the sun is even up, a man with bells stitched to his hood is already awake. Let's begin by gently taking apart the picture in your head. Close your eyes and think of a jester. You're probably seeing the playing card, the three-pointed hat, red and yellow, a bell jingling at each tip, a painted grin, a man turning somersaults while a fat king roars with laughter and throws chicken bones at him. A fool in every sense of the word, the lowest man in the room, tolerated the way you'd tolerate a yapping dog. Hold that picture for a moment. Now let it dissolve, because the real man was something else entirely. In the great courts of medieval and Renaissance Europe, the jester held a position that had no equal anywhere in the kingdom. He was, in many courts, the only human being alive who was permitted to tell the king the truth, not the chancellor who owed his fortune to the king's favor, not the queen whose position depended on his mood, not the archbishop who needed his armies, only the fool, because the fool, by definition, didn't count. His words were officially worthless, and precisely because they were worthless, they could be priceless. Scholars who study this period sometimes call it the fool's license, a kind of unwritten permission slip that let the jester say aloud what everyone else in the room was thinking and no one else dared whisper. A king surrounded by flatterers, men whose careers depended on agreeing with him, had exactly one honest mirror in his life, and that mirror wore bells. There's a reason Shakespeare, writing at the very end of the jester's golden age, filled his plays with wise fools. The fool in King Lear is the only character who tells the old king to his face that he has made a catastrophic mistake, and Lear doesn't execute him for it. He keeps him close. He needs him. Audiences at the time understood this instantly because they knew what a fool actually was. The jester was also, in many households, the king's closest daily companion. Ministers came and went with their papers, ambassadors bowed and departed, but the fool was simply there, at breakfast, in the corridor, riding alongside the hunt, standing in the corner of the sick room. Some jesters served their monarchs for decades, longer than any advisor, longer than most marriages. When Henry VIII of England was old, swollen, and in constant pain from an ulcerated leg, chronicles tell us that often only one man could lift his black moods, and it wasn't a physician or a priest. It was his fool, Will Somers, a stooped, quiet witted man who had been at his side for 20 years. And the jester was a worker. That's the part that gets forgotten most of all, and it's the heart of tonight's story. Jesting was a job, a salaried position in the royal household, with wages, a clothing allowance, lodging, sometimes a horse, sometimes servants of his own, and in the luckiest cases, a pension at the end of it. There were duties from before dawn until long after midnight. There was preparation and rehearsal and study. There were good days when the hall shook with laughter, and terrible days when the fool was the one man sent in to tell a king that his fleet had sunk. So tonight, we're going to live that job hour by hour, from the cold gray moment the castle wakes until the last candle gutters out in the great hall. You will be the fool. You'll feel the weight of the bells and the strange freedom and the danger that always hummed underneath the laughter, quiet as a held breath. But first, before the day can begin, we should answer the question that hangs over everything. How does a person end up in this job at all? Nobody is born a jester. Or rather, as we're about to see, some people almost were. There was no school for fools, no guild, no apprenticeship papers, no examination before a board of solemn masters. And yet somehow, every great court in Europe managed to find one, and the ways they were found tell you almost everything about the medieval world. Broadly speaking, the people of the time recognized two kinds of fool, and they used two different phrases for them. There was the natural fool, and there was the licensed fool, sometimes called an artificial fool. The difference between them matters enormously, and it's a place where tonight's story asks for a little tenderness. A natural fool was a person we would today recognize as having an intellectual disability or some cognitive difference that set him apart. Medieval people didn't have our words for this or our understanding. What they had instead was a strange, contradictory mixture of beliefs. On one hand, such people were often treated cruelly by the world at large, mocked in villages, abandoned by families too poor to feed a son who couldn't work the fields. But on the other hand, there was a deep and genuinely held belief, threaded through medieval Christianity, that these souls were touched by God, that their innocence was holy, that because they were incapable of lying or scheming, heaven spoke through them in ways it would never speak through a clever man. And so a paradox emerged. The same person who might be jeered at a village market could be taken into a royal household and treated in material terms better than almost any peasant in the kingdom, clothed in good wool, fed from the king's own kitchens, given a warm bed, and a servant whose entire job was his care. The royal accounts of England record exactly this. Payments was for the keeping of natural fools, for their shoes and shirts and firewood, for the men and women assigned to look after them. It was not kindness as we would design it. They were kept, in part, as curiosities, and we shouldn't look away from that. But within the logic of their world, a natural fool at court had landed in the safest place available to him, valued, protected, and strangely honored. History rarely offered such people any shelter at all. This, at least, was shelter. The licensed fool was a different creature entirely. He was a professional, a sharp, quick, entirely sane entertainer who had clawed his way to the best gig in the entertainment world through raw talent. And the paths that led to the castle gate were as varied as the men who walked them. Some began as wandering minstrels, drifting from market town to market town with a lute on their back, singing for pennies and learning night after night in smoky taverns exactly which jokes made a room of tired laborers come alive. Some were tumblers and acrobats from performing families, trained from childhood to walk on their hands and swallow their fear. Some were failed students, young men who'd been sent to study for the priesthood, learned their Latin and their logic, and then discovered they were far better at making the refectory laugh than at prayer. That classical education, funnily enough, made them ideal court fools. A jester who could pun in Latin was worth three who couldn't. And some were simply spotted. A monastery, a noble household, a market square, anywhere a quick wit flashed, word could travel. There's a tradition that Will Sommers himself was discovered this way, a merchant's servant from Shropshire whose offhand remarks were so funny that his master, sensing an opportunity, brought him to court and presented him to Henry VIII like a rare falcon. Whether every detail of that story is true, we can't say, but it captures something real. Fools were found the way talent is always found, by someone with an ear for it, standing in the right place. However you arrived, your entry into the household was strangely ordinary. You were sworn in as a servant among servants, entered into the account books between the falconers and the musicians. Your wages were set. You were measured for your clothing, and will come to that clothing because it was not what you think. And from that day forward, your life belonged to the rhythm of the castle, its bells, its meals, its ceremonies, its long, cold corridors. Which brings us, at last, to the beginning of the day. It's an hour before dawn, sometime in the 15th century. Frost on the stones. The castle is a dark shape against a darker sky, and 400 people are asleep inside it. Well, almost 400, you're awake. Before we follow you into that cold pre-dawn chamber, it's worth pausing on the doorstep to understand the world you've just been sworn into, because a royal household in this century is not a home. It's closer to a small walking city, and unless you feel its scale, nothing about the fool's job quite makes sense. A great medieval court numbers in the hundreds. Cooks, bakers, brewers, butlers, grooms, farriers, falconers, huntsmen, clerks, chaplains, choristers, laundresses, chandlers, carpenters, armorers, physicians, apothecaries, tailors, gentlemen and ladies in waiting, pages and squires, guards on the walls, and messengers forever coming and going through the gates. Feeding this population is a military operation that never ends, bred by the hundredweight, ale brewed by the vat because water can't always be trusted, whole herds and orchards and fish ponds existing purely to keep the household fed. When the court travels, and courts travel constantly, eating their way from castle to castle like a slow, glittering glacier, it moves in a baggage train of hundreds of carts, beds and tapestries, and kitchens, and all. And here's the thing about that world, which every modern listener has to consciously imagine, because it's the water those fish swam in. There is nothing to do at night. No screens, obviously, but go further. No recorded music of any kind. Every note of music that has ever reached these people's ears was made by a living person in the same room. Books exist, but they're copied by hand, cost a fortune, and most of the household can't read them anyway. When the sun goes down, and in a northern winter it goes down in the middle of the afternoon, the world contracts to the reach of firelight, and the evening stretches ahead, hours and hours of it, dark and cold and empty. Into that emptiness, human beings poured the only entertainment technology they had, each other. Singing, storytelling, riddles, games, gossip, music, dance. In this world, entertainment isn't a luxury bolted onto life. It is the evening. It's what the hours are made of. A person who could fill those hours, who could make a dark hall feel warm, make a long winter shorter, make 200 tired people laugh at once, possessed something genuinely precious as the cook's fire or the physician's herbs. Now put a crown on it. For a king, entertainment was never just pleasure, it was policy. A court was a stage on which a monarch performed his own magnificence, and everyone, subjects, rivals, foreign ambassadors writing home, read the performance. A splendid feast said, "This king is rich." Fine musicians said, "This king is cultured." And a brilliant fool, famous enough that his jests were repeated in other countries, said something subtler. "This king is secure, confident enough to be laughed at." Ambassadors' letters from the period actually do this. They report on the fools of the courts they visit, the way modern journalists might note the mood of a leader's inner circle. Your jokes, fool, are foreign intelligence. There's one more feature of this world you need to feel, and it's the one that explains why your job exists at all, the loneliness at the center of it. Everything in a court points at the king. Every room is arranged around where he'll sit. Every day is scheduled around his rising and his sleeping. Hundreds of lives orbit his moods the way tides orbit the moon. And that arrangement, which looks like the opposite of loneliness, produces the purest form of it ever devised. The king is never alone and never accompanied. Every face is arranged before it reaches him. Every word has been rehearsed, every request wrapped, every laugh at his jokes a small payment towards some future favor. He lives at the center of the world's warmest room and can trust none of the warmth. Medieval people were not naive about this. They wrote about it constantly. The flatterer was one of the stock villains of the age, sermonized against, satirized, feared. Advice books for princes returned to the problem again and again. How does a ruler find one honest voice? Their world had rejected most of the possible answers. A counselor too honest lost his head or his post. A friend too equal became a rival. And so, over centuries, courts converged on the strange solution we've already glimpsed. The solution with bells on. Keep one person whose words officially don't count and let him say everything. That's the machine you've been hired into. a walking city organized around one man's glory, hollow at the exact center, and you are the small, brightly colored component designed to fit that hollow. The household books will list you among the entertainers. The entertainers know better. They'll treat you, from your first day, as something slightly other than themselves, closer to the throne than any of them will ever stand. The counselors will list you among the servants. The servants know better too. Only the account books ever quite capture it in their flat, honest way. There you are, year after year, entered in the space between the musicians and the physicians, between music and medicine. The clerks who wrote those ledgers had no idea they were making a joke, which, you'd be the first to point out, is how all the best jokes are made. So, now you know the world. It's an hour before dawn, and the walking city is about to wake up. And somewhere near the center of it, in a small room close to the king's, so are you. You wake in the dark, the way everyone in the medieval world wakes, to the sound of the castle stirring around you like a great stone animal. Your bed is a straw stuffed pallet in a small chamber off one of the upper corridors, and pause on that for a moment, because it's your first clue that the fool is no ordinary servant. The kitchen boys sleep on the kitchen floor, curled near the banked fires. The grooms sleep in the stables, in the warm breath of the horses. Most household servants sleep in the great hall itself, side by side on benches and rushes, a whole snoring landscape of them. But you have a chamber, small, yes, shared with your servant, yes, a patient man the household pays to look after your clothing and your props, and on the bad mornings, you. But it's a room with a door close enough to the royal apartments that you can be summoned in moments. In a castle, distance from the king is rank, made visible in stone. You sleep near the center of the world. Listen, below you, the castle is coming alive in layers of sound. The dull iron clang of the kitchen's first pots, the scrape of the gates. Somewhere, a rooster, muffled through 6 feet of wall. The chapel bell rings for the first office of the day, and you hear the shuffle of the devout, and of those who merely wish to be seen being devout, moving through the corridors toward prayer. You lie still for one more moment in the cold. Every worker in history has known this moment, the gathering of the self before the day demands it. Because here is the thing about your job that no one outside it ever understands. The blacksmith can be tired at his forge, the clerk can be gloomy over his ledgers, but you are about to spend an entire day being delightful, and there is no version of this day where you're permitted to look as tired as you feel. Your servant is already up, blowing yesterday's embers back to life in the little hearth. He hands you a heel of bread and a cup of small ale, weak, safe, brewed to be drunk at dawn. Breakfast in this century is a modest, almost apologetic meal. The great eating happens later. You eat standing up by the window slit, watching the sky go from black to iron gray over the hills. Below, in the courtyard, torches move like slow fireflies. The water carriers, the wood haulers, the boy who feeds the hounds. 400 souls, each one a small moving part in the machine that exists for exactly one purpose: the comfort and glory of the single family asleep behind the tallest windows. Your purpose is stranger than anyone's. The cook feeds the king's body. The chaplain tends the king's soul. You are responsible for something no one has a word for yet. Call it his weather. the inner sky of a man who cannot be contradicted, cannot be refused, and cannot ever be entirely trusted to stay calm. When that sky darkens, the whole castle feels it. Decisions curdle, tempers spread downward through the ranks like water through cloth. Your job, before it is jokes or songs or anything else, is to watch that sky and keep it clear. And so, before you've put on a single bell, you begin the true first task of the day, intelligence gathering. No good fool walks into a room blind, so while the castle eats its bread, you drift, and drifting for you is work. You stop by the kitchens first, because kitchens know everything. The cooks are already 3 hours into their day, faces shining, moving between fires with the unhurried speed of men who've done this 10,000 times. They like you here. You're the only member of the upper household who talks to them like people, and you always have, partly because you genuinely like them, and partly because a fool lives and dies by information, and no one hears more than a servant carrying dishes. From the head cook over the noise, you learn the shape of the morning. The king slept badly. His leg again. He shouted at a page before midnight. Ah, so it's to be one of those days. You file it away. From a laundress in the corridor, the ambassador who arrived last night complained about his lodgings, loudly in his own language, not realizing one of the grooms understood it. Filed away. From the boy who feeds the hounds, whom you pay in riddles and the occasional coin, the king's favorite greyhound is limping. Do not, under any circumstances, joke about dogs today. Filed away. This is the fool's paradox, and it will follow you all day. To appear careless, you must be the most careful person in the building. Every effortless jest tonight will be built on this morning's careful listening. The chronicles of jesters that survive, the anecdotes, the recorded quips, they read like lightning, spontaneous and instant. What they don't record is this: the hours of quiet preparation underneath. Every great improviser in history has known the secret. Spontaneity is a performance. Readiness is the job. Mid-morning the summons comes, as it comes almost every day. The king is dressed, has heard mass, and wants his fool. Understand what this moment is. The king's morning is a fortress of ceremony. Gentlemen of the chamber have dressed him, an operation with the choreography of a small religious rite. Officials wait outside his door in strict order of precedence, each clutching papers, each rehearsing his request. Everyone who approaches the king this morning wants something from him, except you. You are the one person in the queue who has come to give rather than take, and every monarch who ever kept a fool understood this distinction in his bones. You slip past the waiting officials, one of your small daily privileges, and don't think they don't resent it, and into the royal presence. What happens next is quiet. That's what would surprise you most, watching from our century. No cartwheels, no capering. The morning visit is small medicine, a dry observation about the weather, a mangled retelling of some gossip, an old joke between the two of you that's been running for 11 years and is no longer really a joke at all, just a shared possession. Some mornings you sing, softly, an old country song from before he was king, from before you were anyone. Some mornings you say almost nothing. You sit on the floor by the fire in the way only you are allowed to, and your presence alone loosens something in the room. The gentlemen of the chamber watch, expressionless. They have seen it 1,000 times, and they still don't fully understand it. The most powerful man in the kingdom, unbending by degrees, because a man in a fool's coat is sitting on his floor like a cat. And then it happens, the small, gruff laugh, half against his will, at some remark you'll never remember making. The sky clears, just a little. The officials outside will get a fairer hearing now. Decisions made in this room today will be a shade more patient, a shade less cruel. No chronicle will record what you just did. It is the most invisible kind of important work there is. There's one more piece of this morning ritual worth knowing, because the household's oldest servants swear by it. The fool as the king's memory. 11 years at a man's elbow makes you the keeper of his archive. The jokes from the coronation summer, the nickname his father used, the song his first queen loved, the whole sediment of a reign that ministers are too new and too careful to mention. Some mornings, your only real work is to say, apropos of nothing, do you remember the year of the frozen river? And watch a man who owns everything be given the one thing no one else can give him, his own past, handed back warm. Kings replaced counselors the way they replaced horses. They almost never replaced a fool who remembered them young. You bow, an elaborate, ridiculous bow, part of the act, and go to put on the uniform. Because the public day is coming, and the public day requires the costume, and the costume deserves its own chapter of the night. Back in your chamber, your servant lays out the working clothes, and here we should pause and gently correct the playing card in your head one more time. The classic image, tight red and yellow diamonds, the three-pointed hat, is real, but it's more of a costume shop memory than a daily reality. What the accounts and portraits actually show is more varied and honestly more interesting. The word that matters is motley. It meant cloth of mixed color, sometimes woven from different colored threads into a flecked, shifting fabric, sometimes garments pieced together from mismatched panels, green against yellow, one leg one color, and one leg another. To medieval eyes, this was a loud and deliberate signal, because in their world, clothing was law. There were actual statutes, sumptuary laws, dictating who could wear what. Colors, fabrics, even the length of a shoe's point were rationed by rank. Every person you passed was legible at a glance. That cloth is a merchant, that fur is a lord, that gray wool is a laborer. And then there was you, a walking scramble of the entire system. Motley said, in a language everyone could read, "This man is outside the order of things. He is no rank," which is precisely what made it possible for you to speak to a king in ways a duke could not. The outfit wasn't decoration, it was your license, printed on cloth, then the hood. Yours is the classic style, a fitted cowl rising into points that flop as you move, sometimes 2 points, like donkey's ears, sometimes a third curling forward, like a rooster's comb. That's the coxcomb, and yes, that's where the insult comes from. At the tip of each point, a small brass bell. Consider those bells, because they're cleverer than they look. A fool is never silent and never invisible. The bells announce you 3 rooms away, and everyone's guard drops slightly at the sound. "Here comes nonsense," says the jingle. "Nothing serious now." Which means the bells are also a kind of camouflage. Some of the truest things said in a medieval court arrived wrapped in the sound of small brass bells. slipped past defenses precisely because they announced themselves as folly. The armor of unseriousness. You'll use it a dozen times before midnight. Then the tool of the trade, the marotte, a short scepter of carved wood, topped with a little head, often a miniature fool's head, wearing a miniature version of your own hood. A king carries a scepter as the emblem of his authority. You carry a mocking echo of it, authority's shadow, its parody. Some fools worked the marotte like a puppet, holding conversations with it, letting it say the truly outrageous things. Don't blame me, sire. It was him. Even your insolence has a scapegoat, and the scapegoat is made of wood. Around your waist, the day's working kit, a small pipe or whistle, dice, a deck's worth of tricks, scraps of ribbon, a Jew's harp that buzzes like a trapped wasp, and other small mysteries for producing wonder at close range. Some fools carried an inflated pig's bladder on a stick, the medieval balloon, for harmlessly whacking pompous courtiers, a slapstick so literal it gave us the word slapstick. Dressed, belled, armed with a wooden head on a stick, you look at yourself in the polished metal mirror. Here's the last thing to understand about the costume. Putting it on is also putting on a self. Out there, you will not quite be you. You'll be the fool, a character you've built joke by joke for a decade, a mask that lets the man underneath watch and think and remember everything. Every performer since the beginning of time knows this doubling. The costume goes on the outside. The watcher stays inside, taking notes. The bells ring as you head for the stairs. The public day begins. Late morning, and the king goes to work, because kings do work endlessly, and the work is mostly listening. The audience chamber fills by rank: petitioners, lawyers, a bishop with a boundary dispute, two merchants who both claim the same shipment of wool, an ambassador with a letter and an agenda. The king sits beneath a canopy of state. Clerks scratch away at a side table. It's the medieval version of an endless committee meeting, and it will consume hours. And you're on the steps of the dais, or leaning against a pillar, or sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of everyone, the only person in the kingdom whose job description includes lounging in the royal presence. To an untrained eye, you're doing nothing, doodling with your marotte, playing with a bit of string, half asleep apparently. But watch closer, because this is one of the subtlest services a fool performs. You're the room's pressure valve. Court audiences are dangerous weather. Proud men, real money, old grudges, everything performed in public, where no one can back down without shame. Arguments climb, voices tighten, and at exactly the right moment, this timing is the skill of your life. The fool says something idiotic, not about the dispute, never about the dispute directly, something sideways, a pun on the lawyer's name, a mournful observation from the marotte about how wool is nothing but sheep's regret, a sudden decision to mimic the bishop's way of clearing his throat, but kindly, just this side of the line. The room laughs. It has permission to laugh. That's what you are, permission in human form. And in the laughter, the shame drains out of the standoff. The merchant who was about to say something unforgivable doesn't. The king, given a beat to think, splits the difference. Next case. The chronicles are full of moments like this, half recorded, because observers sensed they mattered without knowing how to describe them. Modern scholars have a phrase for it now, They talk about the fool managing the emotional temperature of the court. The medieval court had no human resources department, no mediators, no cooling off periods. It had you, a man with a pig's bladder on a stick, doing all three jobs at once while appearing to do nothing at all. There's an art historian's detail worth tucking into your pillow here. In surviving paintings of great court scenes, you'll often find the fool tucked into the corner of the frame. Small, marginal, easy to miss. For a long time, viewers assumed the painters included him as decoration. Look again. The fool in those paintings is almost always watching the king, not the ceremony, not the crowd, the king. Painters painted what they saw. What they saw was a man whose entire working life was reading one face. By early afternoon, the audience winds down. The king goes to dine, and then, if the weather allows, to hunt. And the hunt is its own theater, where you might ride along, bells and all, keeping the party bright. But often, this stretch of the day belongs to you differently, because a fool has errands, and a fool's errands take him where no one else can go. Here's a small detail of medieval life that surprises almost everyone. The main meal of the day wasn't in the evening, it was dinner, and dinner happened around midday in the great hall, and the whole household sat down to it together. So as the audience chamber empties, the castle performs its daily miracle of reorganization. Trestle tables that were stacked against the walls an hour ago are swung down and dressed. Benches scrape into place. The whole population of the walking city begins flowing toward the hall in order of rank, and rank at a medieval table is not a metaphor. Where you sit is who you are. The high table on its dais for the family and the greatest guests. The long tables running down the hall for everyone else. Each seat a precise coordinate on the map of importance. And somewhere along that map, the great ceremonial salt cellar, the boundary marker of the social world. To sit above the salt is to matter. Below it, you're fed and forgotten. People of this era used the phrase without irony. Everyone in this hall knows exactly which side of the salt they live on. Everyone except you. The fool sits nowhere and everywhere, and this, right here, is one of the strangest and most telling privileges of the job. Some fools took a stool at the foot of the high table, some worked the floor and ate afterward, and some, the beloved ones, the ones whose kings couldn't digest without them, were fed from the royal dish itself, handed tidbits off the king's own plate, the way you'd feed a favorite hound, in full view of noblemen who had waited 20 years for the honor of sitting 6 seats away. Every chronicle that mentions this arrangement mentions it with the same faint tone of scandal. A creature with no rank at all, eating above everyone. The medieval social map, folded into a paper bird. The midday meal is a working shift for you, but a gentler one than tonight's feast will be. This is the household's family dinner, not a performance for outsiders. 200 people who all know each other, eating through the early afternoon while the light stands tall in the high windows. The room wants seasoning, not spectacle. So you season. You drift along the tables with your marotte, delivering mock solemn judgments on the food. You referee, loudly and corruptly, a dispute between 2 pages over the last of a pie, taking bribes from both sides and bread crusts, and ruling in favor of a dog. You compose, on the spot, a 2-line epitaph for a cheese the whole table has been complaining about, and by the time it reaches the far end of the hall, it's being repeated wrong, which is how you know it worked. At the high table, you spend a quiet moment being genuinely useful. The king's appetite is poor today, the leg again, and you talk the kitchen's proudest dish onto his plate by loudly claiming it's too good for him and attempting to steal it. He eats it to spite you. The physicist at the side table catches your eye. You've just done his job for him, and you both know it, and neither of you will ever say so. While you work, notice what dinner actually is, because it's easy to miss from 6 centuries away. This meal is the institution that holds the walking city together. Once a day, the entire artificial family of the household, from the earl at the high table to the boy who turns the spit, sits under one roof, eats one meal, hears the same music from the gallery, laughs at the same fool. The Lord dining publicly before his people isn't just habit, it's an idea about what a household is, performed daily. In a world with no newspapers and no notice boards, dinner is also where the community synchronizes itself. Who's back from London? Who's been dismissed? Whose daughter is marrying whom? The hall at dinner is the entire social internet of the castle, running at full bandwidth, and you are, among your other duties, its most reliable content. And dinner is where you take the temperature of the whole organism at once. From the floor of the hall, working the tables, you can read the household the way you read the king's face this morning. The steward's table is tense, some money trouble rolling downhill. The young knights are giddy, a tournament rumor probably true. The ambassador's men eat like soldiers, fast and quiet, confirming what their horses already told you. 3 tables of ordinary cheer, one of suppressed quarrel, one of open flirtation that will be a wedding or a scandal by spring. You bank it all. Tonight's feast will go easier because you spent dinner listening. The meal winds down the way medieval meals do, slowly, with nuts and cheese and one more round of ale, the hall loosening into an unhurried hum. Grace is said. The high table rises, the room rises with it, and then the great daily reorganization runs in reverse. Cloths folded, boards stacked, the hall breathing out, 200 people dispersing back into the machinery of the afternoon. The king will rest now, or ride, or shut himself away with his secretary and the correspondence. Which means the middle of the afternoon, for the first time since that black dark waking, belongs loosely to you. And a fool with a free afternoon and a head full of errands does what fools have always done. He goes down into the town. Here's a side of the job that never made it onto the playing card: the jester as messenger, gatherer, and go-between. Think about the fool's unique properties for a moment. He can talk to anyone. That's literally his job. He is beneath formality. No one has to receive him with ceremony, which means everyone can receive him without commitment. He hears everything because people talk in front of him the way they talk in front of a fireplace. And he belongs to the king personally, not to any faction at court. In a world of rigid protocol, a creature like that is diplomatic gold. So this afternoon, you're sent down into the town below the castle with a small purse and 3 quiet tasks folded inside your foolery. The town takes you in like weather. You're famous here in the way a cathedral gargoyle is famous, part of the landscape, beloved and mocked in the same breath. Children fall in behind you in the muddy street, marching, imitating the jingle. You walk on your hands for them for exactly 10 paces, because a fool in public is always slightly on duty, and because, admit it, you like the sound of children laughing more than any sound the court makes. At the market, you trade insults with the fishwives, who are the finest verbal duelists in the kingdom, and everyone knows it. A fool who can't hold his own against a fishwife has no business performing for kings. This is where the blade gets sharpened. You buy ribbon you don't need from a stall so you can linger and listen. Grain prices are up. The road east is muddy but passable. A preacher passed through last week saying wild things, and two of the town's guildmasters are feuding again. All of it goes into the pack behind your eyes. Tonight, some of it becomes comedy. Some of it becomes something quieter, because a king who hears from his fool that bread is getting dear in the town learns something his official counselors, each with their own reasons for softening the truth, might never quite say plainly. Your second task, the ambassador's household, lodged at an inn below the walls. Officially, you tumble in to bid them welcome, a courtesy of the court, all bells and nonsense. Unofficially, you're the king's eyes for an hour. How many horses in their stable? How is their mood? Do the servants look like men preparing for a long stay or a quick departure? A spy would be searched at the door. A fool is handed a cup of wine and shown everything, because who guards their tongue around a jester? You leave them laughing. You leave knowing their horses are travel worn from a hard, fast ride, which means their errand is urgent, which means their smiling patience upstairs at the castle is a performance. The king will want to know that before supper. And the third task, the one you'd never call a task. On the way back, you stop at a house near the wall where an old carpenter is dying, a man who fixed the castle carts for 40 years and once, decades ago, carved you a new Marat head for nothing. You sit with him a while. You do the trick with the disappearing coin that he's seen 100 times, and he laughs the small dry laugh he has left, and his daughter looks at you over his head with an expression you'll carry the rest of the day. No one assigned this visit, but this too was the fool's role in his world, the person whose presence was permitted anywhere, high or low, sick room or throne room, because laughter was understood to be a kind of medicine centuries before anyone could say why. The physicians of the age, in their solemn treatises on the body's humors, wrote earnestly that mirth warmed the blood and strengthened the heart. They prescribed it. You are, in the most literal way the era could conceive, a working dose. The gate bell rings for late afternoon as you climb back to the castle, legs aching, head full. Now comes the part of the day nobody ever imagines when they imagine your job: homework. Here is the great secret of the funny business. In your century, or in ours, it is a craft, and crafts demand practice, and nobody sees the practice. So let's spend the quiet hour before evening where you actually spend it, in your chamber working. Start with the body. A court fool of your caliber is, among other things, a legitimate athlete, tumbling, handstands, flips off benches, the controlled pratfall that looks bone-breaking and harms nothing. Every one of those is a trained skill with a training cost. You stretch on the cold floor. You run your handstand against the wall until your arms shake. You practice the fall backward over a stool, loose as a dropped rope, because the difference between a funny fall and a broken wrist is 1,000 rehearsals, and you're not 20 anymore, and the stone floor of the great hall forgives nothing. Then the hands. Juggling is meditation with consequences. 3 balls, then 4, then the knives you only use when the wine hasn't been poured yet. The coin walks across your knuckles, vanishes, reappears behind your own ear. You practice tricks on yourself in the mirror, which is either very sad or very funny, and after all these years, you've decided it's funny. Then the voice. You run scales softly, because a fool who sings flat at a feast will hear about it for a week. You work the lute, new strings, a stubborn peg. You go over the long ballad you're building about the summer's disastrous hunting trip, the one where the master of hounds fell in the river. Verse 4 still limps. You fix verse 4. And then the real work, material. You sit by the window with the day's harvest spread out in your mind. The limping greyhound, forbidden. The feuding guildmasters, usable carefully. The ambassador's tired horses. That one goes to the king privately, not to the hall. The price of bread, tricky, funny for the hall, serious for the king, so it will do double duty. You compose 2 riddles for tonight, because riddles are eternally in demand, the medieval equivalent of a hit song. You sharpen one joke about the bishop's throat clearing, and then, thinking of the audience chamber this morning, soften it again. Calibration, always calibration. The fool who forgets the line between teasing a man and shaming him doesn't stay a fool for long. Because, and here the evening light goes a little cold in the chamber, you know the stories. Every fool knows the stories. The French court remembered fools who went too far with the wrong joke about the wrong mistress and vanished from the account books. In England, the great Archibald Armstrong, fool to 2 kings, finally aimed one jeer too many at the powerful Archbishop Laud and was expelled from court for it, stripped and sent away after decades of service for a joke. The fool's license is real, but it is a lease, not a deed, renewed daily, revocable at pleasure. You look at your notes. You cut the 2 riskiest lines. You keep one because you're good at your job and because some part of you believes the risky line is the whole point of the license. Outside, the light is going amber. From the kitchens far below rises the smell that reorganizes the entire castle's attention, roasting meat. The great hall is being dressed, and somewhere the trumpeters are wetting their lips. And then, over all of it, comes a sound that pulls you to the window. Cartwheels on the courtyard cobbles, and voices you don't know, and a snatch of a song you've never heard. Because while you've been sharpening tonight's material, something has arrived down there that deserves a chapter of its own. Traveling players, a troop of them, 4 men and a boy, dusty from the road, come to offer their services for tonight's feast. And your feelings about this fool are exactly as complicated as any professional's feelings about the arrival of other professionals. Understand the world they come from, because you probably came from it too. Beneath the settled, salaried summit of the entertainment world, your world, the fool with the warm room and the quarterly wages, spreads an entire wandering economy of performance. Minstrels traveling in 2 and 3s, with lute and fiddle, singing for suppers. Tumblers and rope dancers who set up in market squares. Players who cart their costumes from great house to great house, performing interludes and miracle plays. Bear wards, God help everyone with their sad shuffling bears. Jugglers, conjurers, tellers of tales, They move along the roads from fair to fair, feast to feast, following the calendar of saints' days, and harvest the way birds follow the seasons. It is a hard, hard living. Some centuries and some kingdoms treated wandering entertainers only a step above vagabonds, moved along by town authorities, suspected of theft and worse, sleeping in barns, one bad winter from disaster. The lucky ones carried letters from noble patrons, little paper shields declaring them somebody's men and not masterless rogues. The luckiest of all caught the eye of a great household and stepped off the road forever into livery and wages. Which is to say, every man in that dusty troop downstairs is auditioning tonight for your life. You go down naturally. Professional courtesy and professional reconnaissance, which at your level are the same thing. You find them in the base court, watering their horse, and you do what entertainers have done on meeting since the beginning of the world. You perform casualness at each other. Their leader knows exactly who you are. Your reputation travels those same roads, carried in the repeated jests, and being known by the wandering profession is a fame more honest than any the court can give. He offers you a drink from their skin. You trade road news for house news. You tell him the king's mood and which lord's tip. He tells you what's playing in the towns, which songs are spreading, what the fool at a rival court pulled at Christmas that everyone's still talking about. That last item you take in without any change of expression and file where you file everything. The fool at the rival court is, in the friendliest and most absolute way, your competition. Kings compare fools the way they compare horses and falconers. Ambassadors carry jests between courts like samples of cloth. There are stories, polished in the retelling, but believed, of monarchs trying to poach one another's famous fools with offers of silk and silver, and of fools sent as gifts between princes, a present more personal than jewels. Your fame reflects on your king. His fool's fame reflects on him. When word arrives that the rival fool has coined something brilliant, your king will glance at you, just slightly, and you will need, within a day or two, without ever appearing to try, to be better. So you watch the troupe rehearse a piece of their interlude there in the courtyard, and you do the arithmetic every headliner does about an opening act. They're good. The boy tumbler especially, fearless, quick, maybe 11 years old, and something in the way he watches you between passes tells you he knows exactly what the ladder looks like and that you're standing on top of it. Good. They'll warm the hall nicely between the second and third courses, make the evening richer, make the king look lavish before his guests. And they are no threat to you whatsoever, because what you'll do at the high table tonight, the named jokes, the 11-year running gags, the reading of one particular face, cannot be carted from town to town. Their art is portable, yours is rooted. That's the whole difference between a player and a fool, and both of you know it, and it lets you be generous. You are generous. You tell the steward they're worth full rate and supper. You teach the boy in 5 minutes by the well a better way to fall off a barrel, angle the hip, spare the wrist, take it on the round of the shoulder where the ground can't find a bone. He has it in 3 attempts. Somewhere behind your ribs, something notes that you at 11 took a week to learn that fall, and that this boy will be somebody's court fool by the time he can grow a beard, and that this is how the strange old profession has always renewed itself, knowledge passed hand to hand in courtyards, master to no one's apprentice, for 1,000 years, without a single guild or school or written word. The troop goes off to eat in the kitchen. You climb back toward your chamber to dress for the evening, past windows going gold, and if you're honest, fools are, famously, the encounter has left you with two feelings sharing the same small room. The first is the warm one. You're established. The road is behind you. The wages are quarterly. The boy watched you the way you once watched a king's fool from a tavern floor. The second one keeps no schedule and pays no wages, and it visits every settled performer who ever watched a troupe roll out through the gates at dawn. The road is behind you. Out there are 100 towns, 1,000 firesides, audiences who've never heard your best material. In here is one audience, one face, every night for the rest of your working life. You'd never trade back, almost never. Ask the Marot. It'll say what you can't. But there's no time for that tonight, because the light in the windows has gone from gold to amber, and the biggest room of your day is about to fill. But before we go down to it, we've arrived at the turning point of the Fool's Day and of our night. And there's something we need to talk about first. The something underneath everything. If you're still awake and still drifting somewhere between this century and that one, here's a soft question to turn over as you sink a little deeper. No need to answer now. The comments will keep until morning. If you had the fool's license for a single day, permission to say one true thing to the most powerful person you know, wrapped safely in a joke, what would you say? Think on it. Or better yet, let it dissolve into the pillow, the way all our braveries do at this hour. Because now we've arrived at the heart of the matter, the center of the fool's strange power, the reason kings kept them for 1,000 years, the thing the playing card never shows. The truth-telling. Picture the problem from the throne's point of view for a moment. You are a king. Every single person who speaks to you, without exception, has an angle. Your counselors want influence. Your nobles want land. Your bishops want privileges. Your family wants successions. Even your servants want favor. Power is a hall of mirrors in which every reflection is smiling, and you can never ever be sure a single smile is real. Flattery isn't an annoyance to a king. It's an environment. It's the air. And a man who breathes only flattery slowly loses the ability to see the world at all, which for a man making decisions about wars and harvests and taxes is not just sad, it's dangerous. Kingdoms have starved because no one dared tell a king his plan was foolish. The fool is the answer. A rougher age worked out to this problem, and it's genuinely elegant. Take one man, place him officially outside the hierarchy. No rank, no lands, no ambitions the system recognizes. Dress him in motley so everyone remembers it. Declare his words to be nonsense by definition. And now, protected by his official worthlessness, he can carry the truth through the hall of mirrors, like a man carrying a candle no one admits they can see. When the fool says the war is unwinnable, the king can laugh, because it's only the fool. No counselor has been contradicted, no honor engaged, no face lost. But the words are in the room now. The king has heard them. He can act on them tomorrow and call it his own idea. The fool's license isn't really permission to mock the king. It's a machine for letting the truth into a sealed chamber, disguised as its opposite. The stories that survive show exactly this machinery running. Courtiers wrote them down, half amazed. A fool who, when two rival advisers each demanded he agree, agreed enthusiastically with both, and then agreed with the king that a man who agrees with everyone must be a fool, which was the entire argument, delivered and landed in 4 sentences of nonsense. Fools who answered dangerous questions with riddles so that the answer belonged to whoever laughed. Fools who could tilt a policy with a shrug. The philosopher Erasmus, writing in praise of folly at the very height of the tradition, marveled that fools could speak truths to princes that would cost a wise man his head, and that princes not only tolerated it, but delighted in it, took a strange relief in it, the way you take relief in the one friend who doesn't need anything from you. And the license lived in small moments too, domestic ones. A fool could tell a king his new hat was ridiculous, could groan at his verses, could beat him at cards without arranging to lose, could mention the gray in his beard, could treat him, for a few minutes at a time, like a man instead of a weather system. Historians who study monarchies sometimes suggest this was the deepest service of all. Everyone needs one person who isn't afraid of them. A king, more than anyone, and a king can't have one, except he could. He could keep exactly one, on salary, in bells. Hold that warm thought a moment, because the same license had a colder use, and it fell on the same shoulders. When the news was so terrible that no one else would carry it, the household turned, by long instinct, to its fool. There is a story from the French court from the 14th century that every fool in Europe eventually heard, because it was a story about them. In the summer of 1340, the French fleet met the English at a place called Sluys, off the Flemish coast, and was annihilated. Ships burned and taken, thousands of men lost to arrows and the sea. Someone had to tell the King of France. The admirals were dead or disgraced. The counselors, by the accounts that have come down to us, looked at their shoes, and so, the chroniclers tell it with a straight face, the task fell to the court fool. He went in, and he began to jeer at the English. Those English, he told the king, scornfully, those cowardly English, sire. They don't even have the courage to jump into the sea the way our brave Frenchmen did. Sit with that line a second, the way the king must have. The joke arrives before the news. The laugh dies halfway, understanding blooming inside it. By the time the king grasped the catastrophe, he had already technically smiled at it, and a message that might have cost a messenger his life had been delivered inside a shape too strange to punish. Whether it happened exactly this way, no one can promise. Chronicles polish their stories like river stones. But the fact that this was the story courts told, that this was who everyone assumed would be sent, tells you what the job truly was. The fool was the household's shock absorber, the one who could enter the room no one else wanted to enter, and not only with defeats. When the king was sick, the fool sat with him, hours in the dim, herb-smelling chamber, doing quiet tricks with a coin, humming, being ordinary at a bedside where everyone else stood rigid with fear, because everyone else's future hung on the patient, and the fool's affection, alone in the room, didn't read as calculation. When the court was in mourning, the fool judged day by day the impossible question of when laughter was permitted to return, too early was obscene, too late let the darkness settle in the stones. When a royal child was frightened, or a royal marriage was quietly failing, or a king lay awake at 3 in the morning with the specific loneliness of men who cannot be contradicted, the account books don't record what the fool did on those nights. But the fools were there, decade after decade, reign after reign, the one constant face. We began tonight by saying the jester's real job wasn't comedy. Here is what it was, as close as one sentence can come. The fool was the keeper of the court's heart, its pressure valve, its truth teller, its sitter with the sick, its permission to feel. The jokes were just the tools. And now the trumpets are actually sounding down in the great hall, because the day has rolled around at last to the part of the job everyone does imagine the feast, and you have a room to hold. We've spoken all night about the fool's license as if it were a solid thing, a shield you could knock on. Before we go down to the feast, honesty asks us to sit for a few minutes with the other truth, the one every fool carried under the motley like a stone. The license was made of mood, and moods change. The stories fools told each other were mostly warnings. They told of the French court, where the license ran older and wilder than almost anywhere. French kings kept fools so famous that their names outlived the king's ministers. The most legendary of them served 2 kings and was celebrated for saying absolutely anything. Centuries later, writers were still building plays and operas around him. But the stories that traveled were about the day anything found its limit, the jest that touched the king's mistress, or the king's dignity at the wrong angle on the wrong afternoon. In the tales, the fool's punishment arrives dressed as another joke. The king, it was said, once granted a fool who'd gone too far the mercy of choosing the manner of his own death. The fool answered instantly, because instantly was his whole trade, that he chose to die of old age. And the court laughed, and the sentence dissolved into banishment instead, and the story survived precisely because it balanced on the knife's edge where the whole profession lived. One line too far, and only a better line could save you. Whether it happened just so hardly matters. Fools repeated it the way sailors repeat storm stories, as doctrine, and the doctrine had real cases. You already know Archibald Armstrong's, but it rewards a slower look because it shows exactly how the shield failed. Archie had risen higher than perhaps any fool in English history, decades at court, wealthy, famous, so secure he'd grown careless. His feud with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most powerful churchman in the kingdom, ran for years, and the court tolerated it because tolerating it was the whole point of having a fool. Then the Archbishop's policies helped set off riots in Scotland, and Archie, meeting him at Whitehall, asked him, publicly, delightedly, "Who's the fool now?" And the shield simply wasn't there. The Archbishop went to the King's Council that same day. The council met that same afternoon, and the order survives in the state papers, dry as all real endings are. The king's fool, for certain scandalous words of a high nature, to be discharged of the king's service and banished the court. A lifetime of license, revoked between dinner and supper. The fool's other stories were about war, because when kings rode to war, their households rode with them, and the account books show the fools going too, bells and all, drawing campaign wages alongside the trumpeters. Picture the job transplanted, the same work of keeping one man's weather, performed now in a leaking tent in a foreign autumn, with the surgeon's wagons unloading nearby. Fools steadied kings on the nights before battles. Fools jested through sieges. Some of the era's accounts note fools wounded, fools ransomed, fools listed among the dead of a lost field, entertainers who followed the household into places no jest could soften, and did their work anyway, because the work was never really the jokes, it was the staying. And some of their stories, the strangest ones, were about fools whose truest performances weren't funny at all. Far to the east of our castle, at the brilliant Renaissance court of Poland, there served a jester whose fame rests on his sorrow. He was, by every account, quick and merciless, and could hold a hall like anyone in the trade. But what the nation remembered, what its greatest painter, centuries later, fixed forever in a canvas every Polish schoolchild still knows, was the other thing. The painting shows a court ball, candlelight, music, dancing crowds glittering in a far doorway, and in the foreground, alone, slumped in a chair in his fool's costume, with his marotte dropped beside him, the jester who has just read the dispatch lying on the table, the news from the frontier that the celebrating court hasn't grasped yet, and who is the only person in the palace who understands what it means. The fool as the one man awake in a dreaming house, the fool whose license to speak had become a sentence to see. That painting hangs a long way from our castle and a few centuries downstream of it, but every real fool would have recognized the chair, because here is the last quiet truth of the dangerous days, and then we'll let the trumpets rescue us. The fool's whole craft was attention, reading rooms, reading faces, reading the world more closely than anyone else in the building. And attention is not a tap you can turn off. The same eyes that found the comedy found everything else: the kingdom's debts, the war's real arithmetic, the sickness under the king's jokes about his own leg. Wisdom and folly were never opposites in this profession. Folly was just the costume wisdom wore to get past the guards. Some nights, alone on the stairs, the costume came off before the man was ready, and what was underneath had to stand there in the torchlight, seeing clearly until it could get the bells back on. Tonight is not one of those nights. Tonight the dispatch box is empty, the king's weather is holding, and the smell rising from the kitchens says the cooks have outdone themselves. Put the stone back under the motley fool, where it lives. Check the bells, down the stairs now, because the trumpets are sounding for the feast. Evening, the great hall of the castle, and there is nothing in your world larger or louder or brighter than this. Torches and fat candles by the hundred, so much flame that the hall has its own weather, a shimmer of heat rising toward the smoke-dark beams. Trestle tables run the room's whole length, dressed in white cloth, packed shoulder to shoulder, knights, ladies, clerks, stewards, the visiting ambassador, and his tired-horsed men, 150 people, arranged in an exact grammar of rank that everyone present can read at a glance. At the head, raised on its dais under the canopy, the high table, the king. Tonight, everything in this room is aimed at him, like iron filings around a lodestone. The noise is oceanic. Servers pour in from the screens at the far end in relays, carrying the courses high. Roasted meats, glazed and steaming, whole birds redressed in their own feathers so they arrive looking alive, bread trenchers, sauces the color of jewels, and wine, always more wine. A feast like this is the castle's whole economy made edible, a year of some village's labor passing along these tables in an evening, and threaded through it all, from the first trumpet to the last candle, the entertainment. Understand that you are not the only performer tonight. You're the headliner of a full bill. The minstrels in the gallery keep music under everything. Between courses, a singer with a harp performs the long, sad ballad that's fashionable this year. Perhaps a troupe of traveling players tumbles through, or a man with a clever dog. The interludes between courses even have their own name: entremets, the entertainment served between the dishes, as if laughter were itself a course. But the room belongs to you, and here's the thing: no one who hasn't done it can understand. Working this room is not one performance, it's 40. Down among the lower tables, the humor is broad: the pratfalls, the bladder on a stick, the juggled knives, the impression of the steward that makes the steward's own staff weep into their sleeves. Up along the high tables, the work turns verbal: the riddles you built this afternoon, the puns that operate in two languages, the ballad about the master of hounds falling in the river, verse 4 now landing perfectly, the whole hall pounding the tables at the chorus, while the master of hounds himself, 3 seats down, laughs hardest of all because you calibrated it that way, teasing, never shaming, because he must still be your friend tomorrow. And you do all of it, note well, while working hungry. The fool performs through the feast and eats around its edges: a snatched wing here, a heel of manship bread there, a cup someone presses on you that you barely touch, because a drunk fool is a fool one joke from disaster, and every man in your trade has watched it happen to someone. 4 hours amid the greatest food in the kingdom, smelling everything, tasting almost nothing. Your real supper waits in the kitchen after midnight, with the cook's, which you'd be quick to say is the better table anyway. The food is the same, and the company is more honest. You read the room the way a sailor reads water. The ambassador smiles with his mouth only. You give his table a courteous nonsense toast in mangled fragments of his own language, and when the real smile. A quarrel is kindling between two young knights near the salt. You land between them with a riddle contest, and make them teammates against you before they can become enemies against each other. The king's leg is hurting him. You can see it. You could see it from 50 feet in a dark room. So you skip the routine that requires his participation and give him instead the thing he secretly likes best: the old song, the truly old one, from before the crown, sung half mockingly so no one suspects either of you of sentiment. Hours of this, course after course, hour after hour, sweat under the motley, voice husbanded carefully, the same alertness you've carried since the dark of this morning, now burning its last reserves. The chronicles, when they describe a successful feast, spare perhaps one line for the fool. He made great sport, they'll write, or the fool made merry. 6 words for 4 hours of the most demanding work in the building. Late, very late, the king rises. The hall rises with him, benches roaring back over stone. Torches are doused down the table's lengths, one by one, and the great room fills with drifting smoke and the smell of tallow and the exhausted victorious wreckage of a feast. Your public day is over. Your last duty is not. It waits up the private stair by the king's own fire, and it is the strangest, softest hour of the whole strange day. But as the emptying hall settles around you, spare one drifting thought for the handful of nights each year when this room went wilder than anything you performed tonight. The nights when the whole world was allowed to be the fool. The feast you just worked was an ordinary great evening, a Tuesday of splendor, as these households measured things. But the fool's calendar had its own high holy days, and before we follow you abuse to the king's fireside, you should know about them, because they reveal something wonderful about how this whole world thought. Medieval life ran on the church's calendar, and the calendar's crown was the Christmas season, not one day but 12, a midwinter archipelago of feasting that began on Christmas and ran clear to Epiphany. 12 days when the harvest was in, the fields were frozen and idle anyway, and the entire society, from palace to plowman's cottage, gave itself over to eating, gaming, visiting, and firelight. For everyone else, the 12 days were rest. For you, they were the championship season, nightly feasts, visiting households to impress, mummings and disguisings to devise, the whole vast machinery of midwinter cheer running through the one professional in the building. But the season's strangest treasure was this. At Christmas, many great households, royal courts, noble houses, even the solemn colleges and law schools, elected a mock king. They called him the Lord of Misrule. Some places, the Abbot of Unreason, or the King of the Bean, chosen in the oldest version by whoever found the single bean baked into the 12th night cake. For the length of the revels, this pretend monarch reigned. He was given a paper crown and a mock court of his own. He issued absurd proclamations that everyone obeyed with enormous ceremony. He commanded lords to sing and dignified elders to dance. The actual king at the actual royal court would bow along with everyone else, playing subject to a jumped-up nobody in tinsel, while the hall wept with laughter. The households kept accounts of it all, real money paid out for the mock king's costumes and his followers' liveries and his fireworks, solemn ledger entries for the annual purchase of official nonsense. Stop and feel how strange and how healthy that is. The most rigidly hierarchical society Europe ever built, the world where your seat at dinner was your soul made visible, set aside days every single year to turn itself upside down on purpose. Servants commanded, boys were crowned. In the great cathedrals, in a related custom that scandalized reformers for centuries, the junior clergy elected a boy bishop who preached in miniature vestments while the canons sat below him. The world inverted ceremonially, safely, annually, and then on Epiphany turned right side up again and went back to work. The philosophers of the age barely bothered to explain it. They didn't need to. Everyone understood the physics. A society wound as tight as theirs needed scheduled unwinding or it would tear. Let the pressure out through a paper crown in January, and it wouldn't blow out through a real rebellion in June. The historians who study festive misrule have argued ever since about whether it truly released rebellion or quietly rehearsed it, but the people of the time mostly just knew it worked. The way you know a fire needs a chimney. And you, fool, you are the chimney the rest of the year. That's the revelation hiding inside the Christmas games. The Lord of Misrule is a seasonal, amateur, disposable version of exactly what you are permanently. Your motley is a paper crown worn all year round. Your license is 12th night, made durable. The same social physics that crowned the Bean King every January kept you on salary every day in between, the world upside down, in one small licensed serving, administered daily like medicine, so that the world right side up could bear its own weight, which made the 12 days a professionally delicate season for you, if you think about it, the one stretch of the year when everyone was allowed to do your job. The hall full of amateurs being licensed and ridiculous. The mock king issuing his proclamations, every squire suddenly a wit. Some fools sulked through Christmas, the way the household accounts occasionally hint. The great ones did the opposite. They got behind the Bean King and made him funnier, ghost writing his proclamations, choreographing his mock court, conducting the season's chaos from just off stage like a master of ceremonies and bells, because a fool secure in his craft knows the difference between 12 days of misrule and a lifetime of it, and knows which one he owns. Epiphany would come. The paper crowns went into the fire. The mock king went back to being a junior clerk with a good memory of himself. The hall's benches went back against the walls, and the household exhaled into the long gray stretch of winter. And on that first ordinary evening after the revels, when the world had turned right side up, and the great room felt suddenly quiet, and a little sad the way rooms do after Christmas, who do you suppose the king wanted at his fireside? The permanent one, the everyday chimney, the paper crown that didn't burn, which is where you're headed now, in fact, up the private stair on an ordinary Tuesday in an ordinary month to the last hour of the working day, the oldest hour of the job. The royal apartments at midnight are another country. Gone is the canopy, the dais, the audience. The king sits by his own fire in a loose gown, the rings off, the performance of kingship set down for the day like a suit of parade armor. His gentlemen move quietly at the edges of the room, readying the great bed, and you are here, cross-legged on the warm stones by the fire, because this, the last hour, has been part of the job for as long as anyone can remember. Sometimes this hour is games, cards, dice, chess if he's in a thinking mood, and one of your quiet privileges is that you're allowed to win. Courtiers lose to kings strategically, and kings know it, and the knowing poisons the pleasure. You play him straight, needle him when he blunders, crow when you take his queen, and he grumbles and loves it, because for the length of a chess game, he gets to be just a man being beaten by his friend. Sometimes it's talk. And here, in the low firelight, the fool's license does its gentlest work. He rehearses tomorrow's difficult decision at you sideways, disguised as complaint. You answer sideways, disguised as nonsense. The marotte offers its wooden opinion, a proverb gets bent until it points somewhere useful, and truth passes between you in the only costume it's allowed to wear in this palace. Some historians, reading between the account book lines, have wondered how much quiet policy in this era was first spoken aloud in rooms like this one, at hours like this one, to men in bells. We'll never know. That's rather the point. It was the one conversation in the kingdom that kept no minutes. And sometimes, the nights you never speak of, no, it's simpler than that. The king can't sleep. His leg, his conscience, his dead, whatever it is kings keep in the dark, and you sit with him and hum the old songs and are simply stubbornly there, one unafraid face at 3 in the morning, until the breathing from the great bed goes long and slow. There's a detail from the English records that people who study this period pass around like a small treasure because it says everything. In the last years of Henry VIII, enormous, ailing, frightening, the king who had sent friends and wives to their deaths, the royal family sat for a grand dynastic portrait. The painter arranged the composition like a statement of state, the king enthroned at the center, his heir at his knee, his queen, his daughters flanking, and there, painted calmly into the doorways at the edges of that official family, the fools. Will Summers on one side, and on the other a woman will meet properly before the night's over, included by the king's own instruction in the picture of the family. No minister made it into that painting, no general, no archbishop. The fool did. That's the job, rendered in oils. The fire is embers now. The gentlemen draw the bed curtains. You gather your bells so they won't ring, and you slip out through the dim privy chamber, past the yawning guards who nod at you. Everyone nods at you. You are everyone's. And back through the sleeping castle toward your own small room. But before we let you sleep, let's answer the question every practical soul listening has been quietly wondering all night. What did this strange, endless, invisible job actually pay? Here's a truth to file under things they never taught you. Being a court fool was one of the best jobs a common born person could hold in the entire medieval world. Start with the base of it. You were a salaried officer of the royal household, a fixed place on the payroll, entered in the same account books as the chaplains and the physicians. Regular wages, paid by the quarter. On top of wages, your keep, food from the king's own kitchens. And remember, in this world, most people's wages were spent mostly on food, so eating free at the finest kitchens in the kingdom effectively doubled your fortune. Lodging within the walls, fuel for your fire, and clothing, which sounds minor and was anything but. The household issued you livery, and for its fool it spent real money. The English accounts survive in places, and they itemize it. Fine wool gowns, hose, shirts, caps, shoes replaced as fast as a tumbling man could wear them out, and occasional entries that stop historians short, like payments for garments in silk and finer stuffs, for embroidery, for fur trim to keep a favorite fool warm. There are years where the crown demonstrably spent more clothing a fool than clothing men of far grander title. Cloth was wealth in this world. On the king's fool, wealth was worn where everyone could see it, a walking advertisement that this court could afford magnificence, even in its nonsense. Then the extras, and the extras could dwarf the salary. Kings tipped, a jest that landed at the right moment, a song that dissolved a black mood. The records show impulse gifts raining down on successful fools, coins, rings off the royal finger, a horse, wine by the cask. Great nobles visiting the court tipped too, partly from delight and partly, everyone understood this, as insurance, because a fool's mockery steered wide of generous men. A famous fool at a great court sat at the center of a warm rain of gratuities. And for the ones who lasted, there was the thing almost no one in this century had: security at the end. Beloved fools were pensioned. The accounts show them kept on the books long after their performing years, lodged, fed, clothed, their servants paid. sometimes granted leases of land, sometimes annuities that ran until death. Will Summers appears in the royal records across 4 reigns. The man who made Henry VIII laugh was still being clothed by the crown under Henry's children, decades on, an institution wearing out gently at the kingdom's expense. In an age when an ordinary aging laborer faced the parish or the road, the old fool by the fire, in his crown bought coat, had reached one of his world's rarest destinations, a safe old age. And beyond the money sat the perks no ledger could hold. The fool went everywhere the household went. You, a commoner's son, have seen more of the kingdom than most of its barons, ridden in royal processions through towns where people climbed roofs to watch, wintered in palaces whose kitchens alone were larger than the house you were born in. You've heard the finest musicians alive, nightly, for free. You've spoken with ambassadors from countries your village priest couldn't find on a map, and made them laugh, which is its own strange species of diplomacy. However, the bargain looks, from 6 centuries away, understand that from inside it, on most days, it looked like the adventure of the age. Set it against the alternatives, and the bargain sharpens. Born common in this century, your ceiling was low and your floor was famine. The fool's ladder went from a tavern floor to a painting beside the royal family. The price was the strangest of all prices. Your dignity, formally and permanently surrendered, your name traded for a fool's name, your safety leased from one man's temper, revocable at pleasure, as Archibald Armstrong learned in a single afternoon after a lifetime's service. Was it worth it? Thousands of quick-witted poor men and women over 10 centuries looked at that trade and took it. Warm, fed, dressed in silk, listened to by kings, and never again entirely a person, always partly a possession. Turn that over as you drift. It's the kind of bargain history offered ordinary people all the time, in 100 shapes. Theirs just happened to come with bells on, and it came in more shapes, in more places, than one castle in one kingdom. Before we let the candles go out, let's take the long view, because the fool, it turns out, is one of the most universal ideas humanity ever had. Here is a strange and rather beautiful fact to fall asleep on. The court fool was not a European invention. He was a human one. Nearly everywhere on earth that power gathered itself into courts, the same figure appeared beside the throne, in different costumes, doing the same impossible job. Go east and far back, much further back than our castle. The courts of ancient China kept jesters more than 2,000 years ago, and the classical histories preserve their stories with open admiration. The most famous of them turned emperors from cruelties and follies with a single well-aimed jest. One tale, recorded by China's great early historian, tells of an emperor who proposed lacquering his city walls at ruinous cost. His jester enthusiastically agreed. "A splendid idea, sire, so beautifully slippery no enemy could ever climb them," and then wondered aloud, innocently, how large a drying room they would need to build over the entire city. The emperor laughed. The wall stayed unlacquered, the treasury stayed solvent, and the jest was written into history as statecraft, because that's what it was. The Chinese tradition understood with perfect clarity what the fool was for. Their jesters are remembered not as clowns, but as the men who could correct the throne and live. Go south and west to the courts of India, and you find the same figure polished into legend. Whole cycles of beloved folk tales, told to this day, told to children at bedtime, much like this one, revolve around the quick witted companions of kings, the clever courtier at the Muggle emperor's side, the poet jester of the southern courts, forever deflating the powerful, rescuing the innocent, and teaching the king wisdom disguised as a joke. The historical men behind those legends are hazier than the stories, as such men always are. But the shape of the figure, the licensed truth teller laughing at the elbow of absolute power, is identical to the man we followed through our castle today, though the two traditions grew up oceans apart. Ride west from those Indian courts, through Persia and Anatolia, and you enter the homeland of perhaps the most beloved fool figure on earth, a folk character so cherished that a dozen nations still argue over which of them he belonged to. The stories call him Nasruddin, a village wise fool in a huge turban, riding his little donkey backwards, outwitting the mighty by pretending not to understand them. In the most famous cycle of tales, he's summoned before a world conquering emperor, the terrifying Timur himself, and survives audience after audience by answering tyranny with such perfectly aimed nonsense that the conqueror can only laugh. Asked to appraise the emperor's worth, the stories say Nasruddin named a sum so insultingly small it barely covered the imperial belt. When the emperor spluttered that the belt alone cost that much, the old man agreed pleasantly. Yes, he'd only been counting the belt. Did a real Nasruddin ever stand before a real emperor? Almost certainly not quite. Folk heroes are stitched together from 100 real, forgotten men. But that's exactly the point. Across the whole Islamic world, from the Balkans to Central Asia, ordinary people spent centuries telling and retelling stories about a fool who could say anything to power and walk away, told them at firesides, in coffee houses, to children at bedtime. The fantasy is identical to the one Europe salaried and dressed in bells. Some cultures kept the fool at court, others kept him in stories. Every one of them kept him somewhere, because everyone, everywhere needed him to exist. And then the fact that has stopped every student of this subject at least once. When the Spanish reached the Americas and walked into the capital of the Aztec Empire, a civilization that had never had any contact with Europe, Asia, or Africa, they found in the palace of the Emperor Moctezuma court de entertainers, dwarfs, hunchbacked companions, and jesters whom the emperor kept close, and who, the conquistador's own chronicles recorded, amused him at his meals and were among those he listened to. The Spanish soldiers recognized the arrangement instantly because their own kings back in Madrid kept exactly the same household. Two worlds separated for the whole of human history, and both had arrived at the same answer. Power is unbearable alone, and somewhere near the throne there must be one voice that doesn't tremble. Wherever the fool appears, Chinese court, Mughal court, Aztec palace, English castle, the local details change, and the core never does. He is licensed. He is protected by his own official worthlessness. He is closer to the ruler than the ruler's own ministers, and he is doing, everywhere, the same three jobs we watched all day, keeping the ruler's weather, carrying the unsayable, and holding the room. Humanity, it turns out, kept inventing the jester the way it kept inventing the boat. Some tools are just answers to being human, and one of them wears bells. But history's account books, honest things, record one more group of fools, the quietest ones. And before the castle sleeps, they deserve a candle of their own. Most of tonight, we've followed the fool at the top of his profession, the licensed wit, the salaried star. But the household account books, which are the truest chronicles we have because they never exaggerate, record other fools too, and their entries are shorter and softer and worth reading slowly. Remember the natural fools, the men and women with minds the age had no words for, taken into royal households and kept there. The books log their lives in small purchases, shoes, shirts, a warm gown against winter, wages paid not to them, but to their keepers, the servants employed, sometimes for decades, to wash them, dress them, walk them, watch over them. In the entries, you can trace whole, quiet biographies. A fool falls ill, and the household pays for his physician. A fool's keeper dies, and a new one is hired within the week. A fool grows old, and the purchases simply continue, year after year, long after any record of him performing anything at all. He had stopped being entertainment, if he ever really was. The household kept him anyway. There is a word for what the account books are describing, even if no one wrote it down, and the word is care, imperfect, unequal, wrapped in assumptions we would never accept, but care. And among these entries, if you look, you find the women. Yes, women. History remembers the jester as a man, but the books know better. Queens and princesses kept female fools, and a few crossed into something like fame. At the English court, in the same years, Will Sommers kept the king's weather. A woman the records call Jane the Fool served the queens. Her gowns itemized, her keeper paid, her head regularly shaved in the fashion kept for fools, her place secure through the households of 3 different queens in the most dangerous decade of the century. She is there in that great dynastic portrait, too, standing calm in her doorway on the opposite side from Somers, a woman born ordinary, painted into the picture of the royal family, whose full name and inner life we will simply never know. That's what we can see of her, a silhouette in a doorway, a line of purchases, 60 shillings of gown. And maybe that's the rightest possible place to end the fool's story, because it was always a story about the people history looked straight at and never quite saw. The laughter got recorded. The people who made it slipped through, leaving bells in the margins. Hold Jane in the doorway for a moment, then let her go, gently, the way we let all of them go. The night is getting deep, and out beyond our one castle, out in the long run of history, the torches of the great halls are beginning, one by one, to go out. Nothing in history ends on a day. The court fool faded the way daylight fades, so gradually that no one in the room could ever have told you the moment it happened. By the 1600s, the world that needed him was dissolving. The great households that had held hundreds of retainers were shrinking into something more modern and more accountable. Courts were becoming governments, paper committees, ministers, and a committee has no weather for a fool to keep. Manners changed. The new fashion of politeness looked at the old license and saw only rudeness. The theaters had opened, and a king who wanted wit could now hire it by the evening from professionals who went home afterward, rather than keep it living in his house like a hearth fire that talked back. In England, the fashion had already grown so old fashioned that Shakespeare's company was filling plays with wise fools, partly out of nostalgia, the way we make films about lighthouse keepers and telegraph operators, lovingly, once they're safely almost gone. The last court fools flicker in the records of the 1600s, like the last candles of the feast. In England, a fool called Muckle John appears in the accounts of King Charles I. New coats, new boots, the same faithful entries the books had been making for 5 centuries. And then the Civil War comes. The king himself goes to the scaffold, and when the monarchy is eventually restored, nobody rehires a fool. The line just stops. No decree abolished the office. No one thought to. The account books simply run out of entries, which is how most things in history actually end, not with a bell, but with a blank. And yet, you already know the job didn't die. Only the costume did. The work we watched all day was never really about Motley and Marats. It was about Power's oldest problem, the sealed room, the hall of mirrors, the ruler who slowly stops hearing the truth. That problem never went anywhere, and so the fool never really did either. He took off the bells and became the satirist, the cartoonist, the columnist, the late night host monologuing at the powerful, every one of them working under some version of the old license, saying the unsayable inside the armor of a joke, protected imperfectly by the ancient rule that you cannot execute a man for nonsense. The next time you hear a comedian say something true enough to sting about someone, powerful enough to matter, listen closely underneath the laughter. Small brass bells, 600 years old and still ringing. But that's tomorrow's noise and daylight thinking. Ours is the older, quieter world, and in that world, it's very late now, and there's one last walk to take. Come back one last time. The castle, past midnight, and you, the fool, climbing the spiral stair to your small room, a single candle cupped in your hand, your bells gathered silent in your fist. The great hall below is dark and enormous, smelling of smoke and spilled wine. The servants asleep in rows along its walls, like the crew of a beached ship. The corridors hold that after-feast hush, thick as wool. Through a window slit, the courtyard lies blue under the moon. A guard's slow footsteps cross it, unhurried, and somewhere beyond the walls, the town has gone under entirely, every candle out, the whole valley given over to sleep and owls. Your room at last? The embers your servant banked are still breathing faintly in the little hearth. You set down the candle, you take off the day piece by piece, the hood with its silent bells hung on its peg, the motley folded over the chest, the Marat propped in its corner where its small wooden face can watch the door. Just a tired man now, in a plain shirt, no rank, no character, rubbing his sore shoulder. The watcher, who lived behind the fool's eyes all day, can finally close them. You lie down on the straw-stuffed pallet, pull the good wool blanket up, crown property, that blanket, like everything here, like you, and let the day drain out of you into the dark. It was a good day, as the fool's days go. The king laughed before noon. The quarrel at the feast died as a riddle contest. Verse 4 landed. The old carpenter laughed his small, dry laugh. No line went too far. The license held one more day. Tomorrow it starts again before dawn. The kitchens, the listening, the weather of the king. But that's tomorrow's performance, and even fools are permitted to stop performing in the dark. Outside your door, the castle ticks and settles, stone cooling, 400 sleepers breathing in the dark around you, the whole improbable world of it. Kings and cooks, fools and falconers, adrift now in the same warm ocean you're sinking into. Let your own breathing slow to match his. In through the nose, slow, the way sleep likes it. Out even slower. The fool's chamber is warm now, or warm enough, the ember light moving faintly on the stone ceiling, the wind saying something long and unimportant in the arrow slit, the wool blanket heavier and heavier, the good heaviness, the kind that pins you gently to the world on your way out of it. Somewhere below, a last servant banks a last fire. Somewhere above, on the walls, a guard leans on cold stone and watches the moon do nothing, beautifully, over the black hills. The whole castle is one slow breath now, in and hold and out. The kitchen's dark, the hall dark, the chapel dark, save its one small watching flame. Every ambitious, scheming, laughing, grieving soul in the walking city has laid its business down at last, because night is the one lord, even kings obey. The embers dim, the bells hang still. Sleep comes for the fool the way it comes for everyone, common and crowned alike, patiently and all at once. And sleep is coming for you now, too, wherever you are, these 6 centuries downstream. Let it. You've traveled a long way tonight, a whole day's work in a vanished world, dawn to midnight, kitchen to throne room. Let the pictures soften, the torchlit hall, the motley folded on the chest, Jane calm in her painted doorway, the small brass bells still ringing somewhere under all the world's laughter. Thank you for spending this night in the castle with me. If the old stories helped you drift, the subscribe button is down there in the dark somewhere, and I'll be reading your family's stories in the comments come morning. Until then, let the candle gutter. Let the castle hold you. Rest easy. Sleep well. This is Drowsy History.